Hi everybody, this is Paul Sargent with you, and today we are taking a look at Key Concept 1.2, The Rise of Nations. And we're going to start off in the Renaissance with Renaissance politics. So let's get moving. So when we're looking at this, the whole idea here is all about power. And in the Renaissance in Italy, power was a really difficult thing to come by because it was all divided up. Now there were 5 major states up in Italy, and really the political divisions you don't need to know all that much about, but there is Milan and Venice up in the north. The Republic of Florence becomes a very large and very powerful city where, the Renaissance really kind of gets started and is ruled largely by the Medici for a good portion of its time. The Papal States, which is centered around Rome and being run by, well, the papacy, and the Kingdom of Naples down south. But the whole idea here is that this is like sort of a bunch of, like it's really divided, and there's no centralized authority here. And so you have all of these independent city-states which are out there, and they're competing with one another, not sort of working together as one Italy. In fact, one Italy won't come until the late 19th century. All right, so you see here the big divisions. You've got, here's Milan, and here's Florence, and all of that. Here's a papal state. You get the idea, right? So all of these different areas are competing with one another, and they're being ruled by their own sort of local elite. Now, this is an example of the elite that how they're sort of dressed and portrayed and all of that, how they pay for art to show off their own wealth and all of that. But yeah, it's these families which are kind of ruling Italy. Now, of course, there's competition, and that competition can lead to warfare. And there's this idea of the balance of power there, that if city-states kind of align together, maybe against other city-states, that there can be a balance of power. No one city-state becomes too powerful. You're going to see this. This is like a really, really key idea because you're going to see this all throughout the year, this idea of a balance of power. But the balance of power in Italy is between these city-states who are themselves not very strong or wealthy. And so really what happens is you have France and Spain that end up dominating the peninsula, and they come in and they basically fight over, partially because they're called in. Now, this does bring with it the idea of modern diplomacy, where one political area will have ambassadors that are assigned to other political areas. They will start talking about different agreements they might come up with and stuff like that. And then, of course, to sort of bring it all into light, we have the writings of Machiavelli, who's notable as sort of a humanist scholar, and we talked about humanism earlier in the year. And his big idea is the Prince, and his message in the Prince is that Italy needs some sort of strong central leader, the likes of which he's seeing in France and other places which are consolidating power. And of course, he's very famous for saying it's better to be feared than loved, that fear is going to last longer than love is, especially in difficult times. But the goal of a leader should be the acquisition, maintenance, and expansion of power. Now, people are going to be reading Machiavelli for centuries. They still today. So here, this is a basic chronology. If you want to look through it, you want to look over it, you can. For the purposes of the AP exam, this is a really important date. You don't need to know the date itself, but the sack of Rome does mark the end of the Renaissance in Italy. And there's Machiavelli himself, so good cameo. Now, power starts to grow throughout Europe in this period, and it's really monarchies that in some areas, mostly Western Europe, that come together and consolidate power. 2 good examples of this: Louis XI, the Spider King, and the Henry VII, the Tudor monarch of England. And the idea behind these guys is that they are both expanding their country, but they're also creating a stronger central state, so that when you have central power, that's organized around one ruler, then that's going to sort of increase the power that your country has. And it's going to be these rulers who are able to harness that power to become, well, to basically rule the world. All right. They're also using art to try and sort of expand their power and push all of that together. So that by the time you have the second half of the 15th century, you can see France here has pretty much consolidated itself into a pretty strong state, even though they are not officially politically united. Spain is pretty much its own entity. England has united pretty well. And then, here is a divided papal states, a weak Holy Roman Empire, a weak Poland with an elected monarchy, and sort of this real big question of like, what's this going to become? Hint, hint, Russia. So a lot going on here. Now, there is, of course, very successful unification in Spain, where you have Ferdinand and Isabella. You all learned about those even in elementary school when you learned about Christopher Columbus. And they bring together, they not only unify, quote-unquote, Spain, but they start this professional royal army, because the change in military with the advent of gunpowder has made it so that now it doesn't take a lifetime of training and a whole lot of money to outfit a soldier who can fight, because you take all that training and you learn to be a knight, and then the next thing you know, like, bam, some guy with a cannon mows a whole line of you down. They also push for religious uniformity in Spain, saying that that's the only way they can really, truly assure a solid state, is if everyone's the same religion. So, as you would expect, or as nobody expects, depending on what you've seen, they established the Spanish Inquisition. They complete what's called, and these are both sort of part of it, the Reconquista, in which they conquer the last Muslim holdout in Granada, and they kick out Jews from Spain. This is all done in 1492, which is also the year they send Columbus on his voyage. The whole Holy Roman Empire does have some success in terms of the Habsburgs. They're able to maintain power, but the Holy Roman Empire itself is a weak monarchy, although it's going to hold on in various forms for quite a long time. But their big tool is dynastic marriage, okay? And you can see this. I mean, this is like visual, because not only did they make sure that they try and maintain power by marrying into all the royal families throughout Europe and having those families heavily invested in the success of the Habsburgs, but they also pass on their genetic traits. And you see this very sort of prominent chin have. So here's the Iberian Peninsula. You can see these are the two areas, Castile and Aragon, which are united by Ferdinand and Isabella. They also gain these areas and unite. In Eastern Europe, things are more difficult. In Poland, there is a real conflict between the nobility and the crown, and the crown here is elected, so it's kind of hard to maintain power if you have to keep people happy who are electing you. Hungary is less successful. Russia is less successful. Ivan is able to overthrow the Mongols, but the central state of Russia is not going to come out of that. And then here, big date for the Renaissance is the fall of Constantinople in the east to these Ottoman Turks. So the Byzantine Empire, which has been around since really when Constantine set up Constantinople in the east, or maybe you could argue since the fall of Rome and at the end of the Western Roman Empire. Anyway, they've been around for basically 1,000 years in Byzantium, or in Constantinople, and it falls to the Turks in 1453, which leads people to go like, oh no, this is bad. So basically, this is the general chronology of what happens throughout Europe in terms of consolidating this power. So I'll stop there and say that's our very first look at the different structures in Europe as we go through. Next time we'll take a look at the church during the Renaissance, and we'll also take a look at the development of power in the wake of the Reformation. So hopefully this helps you, and I'll see you next time.